The earliest person to warn about the risks of artificial intelligence is now the one who no longer has the power to decide its future. And perhaps this is not a personal tragedy at all, but a signal of a new power structure quietly taking shape. For most of the history of technology, we are used to a simple story. A visionary individual, an idea ahead of its time, and a world that moves slowly, but eventually follows. Steve Jobs with personal computers, Bill Gates with software on every desk, Elon Musk with electric cars, rockets, and unconventional visions of the future. But artificial intelligence does not follow that trajectory. AI does not grow like a product. It grows like infrastructure. When technology becomes infrastructure, power begins to drift away from the people who originally imagined it. Elon Musk was present in the early days of OpenAI, when the word open still meant what it said, when the goal was not market dominance, but preventing a future where AI would fall into the hands of a small number of corporations. At that time, OpenAI resembled an ethical laboratory more than a business, a collective attempt to move slowly, stay open, and move together. But the outside world did not move slowly. The AI race accelerated faster than any script had predicted. Costs rose, computing demands exploded, pressure to deploy real-world systems increased, and OpenAI began to change. Not overnight, and not through a single shocking decision, but through a series of adjustments that each appeared reasonable on their own. A hybrid model emerged, nonprofit control at the top, commercial operations underneath. In theory, it was an attempt to balance ideals with reality. But from that moment on, OpenAI was no longer just an ethical experiment. It began to function as a center of power. And when a center of power forms, it no longer runs on individual vision. Elon Musk left OpenAI relatively early. The specific reasons matter less than the timing. He exited when AI was still a debate, when risks were largely theoretical, when power had not yet solidified into structure. After that, OpenAI continued to grow, not just as a laboratory, but as a central node in the global AI ecosystem. When Musk re-entered the conversation, he was no longer inside the system, but outside it, speaking as a warning voice. Many people view the conflict between Elon Musk and OpenAI as a personal dispute. But if we look more closely, what is colliding here is not two individuals. It is a clash between two models of power. On one side is the power of the founding individual, derived from seeing what others cannot yet see, saying what others do not want to hear, and warning about the future before it becomes obvious. On the other side is the power of the organization, derived from resources, networks, and the ability to sustain, scale, and outlast any individual. When technology is small, these two forms of power can coexist. But when technology becomes large enough, only one remains at the center. Artificial intelligence has crossed that threshold. Today, AI power no longer lies in who has the better idea. It lies in data, capital, strategic partnerships, and the ability to deploy AI into daily life faster than society can formulate questions about it. At this point, individual vision is no longer sufficient. This is why Elon Musk, despite retaining a public voice, no longer holds decisive influence in this space. Not because he is wrong, and not because he is weak, but because the rules of the game have changed. When AI becomes infrastructure, power belongs not to those who warn most convincingly, but to those who can operate the system the longest. In this context, OpenAI no longer represents AI for humanity in its original romantic sense. It represents a different reality. AI governed like electricity, the internet, or global finance. The more important it becomes, the more control it requires. The more widespread it becomes, the more standardization it demands. And the more deeply it integrates into society, or the more it must align with state power and large institutions. Not because anyone is malicious, but because the system itself requires it. This is where the paradox emerges. Those who create technologies are rarely the ones who decide their final fate. They may lay foundations, issue early warnings, and shape initial narratives. But once technology becomes infrastructure, the rules are no longer written by them. The dispute between Elon Musk and OpenAI is only the surface. Beneath it lies a much larger question, one without a clear answer. When technology becomes powerful enough to shape society, yet too complex for individuals to control, who holds the steering wheel? This piece does not attempt to answer that question definitively. It aims instead to step back and observe the shape of power forming around artificial intelligence. Historically, power tends to have a name, a king, a president, a corporation, an institution. Even when power concentrates, people prefer to attach it to a recognizable actor. It makes the world easier to understand and easier to blame. But AI is creating a different kind of power, one that functions best without a visible face. When AI becomes infrastructure, it is no longer owned in the conventional sense. It is governed. And governance here is not merely corporate management. It is the management of data flows, usage norms, social risks, and most importantly, consequences that have not yet occurred. At this level, power no longer resides in individual decision-makers. It resides in processes, committees, agreements, and informal standards. Structures that no one elected, yet everyone must live with. This is why debates about whether OpenAI has betrayed its original ideals often lead nowhere. Not because the question is wrong, but because it assumes there is still a single moral center to return to. In reality, once AI is embedded across the economy, education, media, and national security, no organization can simply turn back without triggering cascading effects. Power at this stage is no longer purely ethical. It becomes risk management. From here, two broad trajectories begin to take shape simultaneously. Neither is entirely good, and neither is entirely bad. The first is centralized power. A small number of organizations control core AI models, not because they are greedier, but because they are large enough to bear responsibility. In this scenario, AI becomes tightly integrated with major corporations and governments. Standards become clearer. Behavior becomes more predictable. Surface-level risks are better controlled. The cost, however, is dependency. When AI infrastructure concentrates, society must trust that those who operate it will act responsibly. They are not always wrong, but they are not always free to choose otherwise. In this environment, power does not need to be imposed. It simply becomes the default. The second trajectory is AI fragmentation. Multiple models, multiple power centers, multiple approaches. This sounds more democratic, and in some ways it is. But fragmentation also brings chaos. Standards become harder to align, responsibility is constantly shifted, and when failures occur, accountability becomes difficult to pinpoint. In fragmented environments, power is not centralized, but risk spreads widely. What is notable is that in both scenarios, the role of individuals does not disappear, but it changes profoundly. Individuals no longer decide the direction of technology. They shape the boundaries of debate. Warnings from Elon Musk or anyone else rarely stop systems outright, but they force systems to justify themselves, to explain, to demonstrate that they remain under control. This is not command power, it is pressure power. From another perspective, society may be entering a phase where technological power operates like climate. No one owns the climate, but everyone is affected by it. No single decision causes dramatic change, but millions of small decisions, repeated over time, do. AI is gradually becoming an environment rather than a tool. And at that point, the question is no longer who controls AI, but who can adapt to it most effectively. This raises an uncomfortable issue. If power no longer resides with specific individuals, where does responsibility lie? The usual answer is the system. But systems have no conscience. They respond only to pressure from markets, politics, public opinion, and crisis. And here, the role of the public reemerges, indirectly. The public does not decide how AI is built, but it does decide what becomes unacceptable. These boundaries do not appear instantly. They form over time through debate, mistakes, and crisis. In this sense, conflicts like the one between Elon Musk and OpenAI are not meaningless. They are early signals, showing where boundaries are being stretched. Not to choose sides, but to recognize that power is shifting. In the future, we may not remember who was right in this dispute, but we will likely live in a world shaped by decisions made during this period. A world where AI does not need permission to exist, only to be useful enough that it cannot be removed. And at that point, questions about individuals change. It is no longer who controls AI, but what can individuals do inside a system they do not control? The answer may not lie in reclaiming power, but in understanding its limits, knowing when to warn, when to adapt, and when to accept that some forces have moved beyond direct control. This does not make individuals irrelevant, but it does require humility in the face of the systems we inhabit. Seen this way, the clash between Elon Musk and OpenAI is not an ending. It is an opening chapter in a longer, broader, and less personal sequence of conflicts. Similar tensions will emerge in other companies, other countries, and sectors never previously considered technological. And perhaps the most important realization is not which side to support, but that we are entering an era where power no longer has a clear face. It operates quietly, steadily, and is very difficult to reverse. Before closing, there is one open question worth carrying beyond this video. Not to answer immediately, but to reflect on. If one day AI becomes indispensable infrastructure like electricity or the internet, what should society prioritize more? Tight but centralized control, or diversity with limited control? You can share your perspective in the comments. And for now, thank you for taking the time to listen. Goodbye and see you in the next analysis.